Welcome to Everyone Eats. I'm Jeremy Bowditch. On today's show, we're doing part 2 of our Abolition season finale. In this episode, we're going to do things a little bit differently. It's going to be a more conversational tone where we kind of talk about what we learned, why we did what we did, and what we hope that the audience picked up. And I'm actually in studio now with my producer, Dan.
Hey, everybody. I'm Dan Gallucci, and I am a producer on Everyone Eats.
Dan is the second in our 3-part team that put the show together. Joy Sanford was part of the team that helped put the show together, and I credit her with developing the tone and really the mission.
We had a list that was created by the three of us, and Joy booked every one of our amazing guests, also helping define what the show will be, creating the art.
If you put it in TV terms, I would say Joy basically helped us make the pilot, which locked down everything the show would become. Basically make one that works and does all the things you want, and then just repeat with different content. But I want to actually bring up something from our first episode. It's a quote from Angela Davis, where she kind of just lays out in black and white terms why abolition is so important. What we can have if we are not choking our municipal budgets with the cost of law enforcement.
I've always linked abolition with socialism. So I would say that in imagining the future, this future would be one in which the necessities of life are not commodified, in which one's capacity to live a fruitful life is not dependent on one's capacity to pay for those services. This is about revolution. But I do think that the abolitionist imagination is central to the process of envisioning a new world and developing the strategies for challenging the current one.
The first person we're going to hear from is Gina Viola. She's a guest from earlier in the season. She also ran for mayor of Los Angeles in 2022. Her episode was all about healthcare, right? The idea that we could have single-payer healthcare versus what we currently have, which is for-profit healthcare. What she describes is an idea where instead of the government writing a check for a service, there is a middleman in between. We would call that a capitalist. We would call that a company. And that person takes a piece, and they then provide the service. Or do they? If you don't have the money to pay for that commodity, you don't get it, even if you do need it to live. That is happening across society, but there are pockets where it's less aggressive, where somehow that public money does find its way to the street. There are parts of our city, even today, where you could walk down the sidewalk and look around and be like, wow, it feels like there's a lot of attention and city services happening here. How's that going on? Gina says that these are choices made, that some areas of the city receive the full effect of public funding, and some areas don't. One of the reasons they don't is because we spend 25 cents out of every dollar on police. So the money you would want to give to public housing, to school lunch, to free public transit, to whatever it is someone needs, it exists, but it's locked up in that police budget. In places that haven't been publicly funded, policing is the only thing they have access to. So now we're going to hear from Gina Viola a little bit about the way our city is set up, who has, who doesn't, and why. I want to talk to you now about what things could be like here if we could decommodify, if we could remove the need to make a profit. We're spending $100 on insert any city need here. I'll say filling a pothole. If instead of hiring a private company to fill the pothole and try and keep as much of that $100 for themselves while still technically getting the pothole filled, which is our current system, city government, state, federal, a whole deal. How could we here in LA spend that $100 directly on pothole filling without any profit? That's a made-up example, but just in general, that's the model, right? Like single payer sounds like does that. The government just pays that bill directly, doesn't hire a company to do it. Well, how can we do more of that in more areas in Los Angeles? Like what are the opportunities here in our local government to kind of make a transformation in that direction?
It's sort of shocking that we're not doing it now when you look at the sheer numbers of people who work for the city and the county of Los Angeles. There's 50,000 full-time workers for the city of Los Angeles and another, I think, 20 or 25,000 part-time workers. So that's 75,000 workers. 100,000 workers that work for the county. That's 175,000 people. You can't tell me that we need to outsource any of that so that there's a profit. One of the things I'd like to see is I'd like to see a third of those people repurposed to be advocates for the unhoused. Because you could give each unhoused person in LA County one advocate to stick with them for 2 to 3 years. Build community, build connection, build trust, help them navigate the needs that they tell you they need, not that you think they need. So you don't even need a tremendous amount of training for this job. You just need to be a decent person, let's say, not even a good person, a decent person, care, stay engaged, stay connected. I mean, this seems very doable. And that's what I used to say to people. People are like, oh, we're never going to fix this problem. It's so big. You're just one person. I was like, yes, but if just one person who had their shit together helped one person who didn't, we'd be out of this mess quickly. And we could do that with the government we have now. All you have to do is drive through the city. There's no love in the city anymore. When I filed to run for mayor, the clerk at the office DM'd me later to say, you brought me some hope. I was really upset about what our choices were to run for mayor. But one of the things she said is you need to know that the majority of the people who work for the city don't live in the city. And I was like, yeah, that I feel that.
I heard that about cops. They all live in Castaic.
Oh,
and
96% of the police don't.
Right.
So can you imagine the lack of love you have when you've commuted? You're already in a bad mood because you've commuted to come into the city that you now have to take care of and steward. So there's a lot that needs to change. Things need to get like hyper local, right? I know for myself, what I've done with my community of people, let's say my 20 neighbors I'm, in close proximity with, they call me now instead of calling the police. If there's an unhoused person or there was a man with a pipe that was running up and down, and my neighbor came and got me. Can you come deal with this? So we have to teach each other how to help each other instead of just call the police for everything and decide, the government's terrible at everything because everything's terrible.
It's not even the government. It's the private business which has stepped in to take that government check, don't mind if I do, and then, hey guys, what if we just maximize our profits instead of doing this service thing? What do you say?
Yeah.
What's the legally minimum requirement we can do to fulfill this contract? 2 of those, please. Thank you. And just repeat for any sort of service you need from the city society at large. It has been privatized. It has been commodified.
And you know why? Because the lion's share of our municipal budgets have gone to law enforcement. So then they're forced to say, we can't afford county people at a county, minimum wage hour anymore to do this job because the sheriff's getting $35 billion of that budget, right? LAPD is getting $3.5 billion of the budget. Even as we've been very successful at decarcerating, especially youth, right? We've closed some youth camps. We're thankfully not incarcerating youth at the levels we once were.
Mm-hmm.
So now, you know what probation costs per youth? $800,000 a year. Per youth.
Gina, stop it. I'm going to ask you to say it again clearly for the audience at home. If you are driving, I want you to get control of the wheel. Say it one more time. This is the per person cost.
About a year ago, so it's probably even more now, but it was $800,000 a year for a youth to be on probation.
I'd like to know what a year at like Hogwarts costs, including full room and board,
exactly.
Right? And a personal masseuse and a personal gym trainer for every child in probation. Like, what is the cost? I'd love to see the 1-to-1.
How about that private school?
Oh my God.
How about that? Let's build that. Let's build that with our...
So we'll spend $800,000 a year to basically randomly drug test and harass you and like
monitor
basically
and
like keep you under surveillance, on the hopes that we can catch you fucking up.
Yep.
So we can incarcerate you and put you back in prison. We'll spend money on that. $800,000 a year on that. On youth parole, this is?
Youth
for like
probation.
A 15-year-old who may have broken into a car, whatever. That's a good amount of money. How much would it cost to put up a fucking basketball hoop in that kid's neighborhood?
Exactly.
Right?
Well, and couple that with youth development. Okay, so look at the city's budget, right? Youth development doesn't even register on the graph. You can't even see the bar. It's so little. Yet supposedly we're worried about youth. So much so that we're willing to spend $800,000.
You were with the People's Budget LA. That was one of the
Yes.
reasons you ran, was to present their budget. I
Yes.
had Dr. Abdullah on. She talked about the priorities this year. Just for those who aren't familiar, this is a large 25,000 plus person social scientific study done by people from Berkeley and UCLA. And every year they ask, how should we spend the budget? And every year it is not 90% to the LAPD. So this year, the
Not even
number
close.
one thing was housing. Number two was healthcare. None of them wanted to spend all the money we're spending on law enforcement or parking enforcement, just didn't see the need to spend billions.
You want to hear
on those
something
topics.
infuriating about parking enforcement?
Please tell me.
It costs more money to administer it than we actually make from the tickets.
See, I've heard this rumor
And the
about
meters.
Metro fares, the same thing. Like
Same thing
every
with Metro.
dollar they get
Yep.
from Metro fare, they spend 75 cents to collect. You're
Yep.
saying on parking tickets, it's actually costing them money to write those tickets.
Yes. Yes.
One of the questions I had in my little pre-interview thing here was participatory budgeting.
Mm-hmm.
You know people don't want to use our budget the way it's currently being used.
Mhm.
What else is available? If we broke the piggy bank and we're no longer spending $800,000 a year to make 15-year-olds piss in cups, what could we do with that money? You briefly mentioned youth development. I just kind of casually tossed out, put up a basketball hoop in their neighborhood.
That's right. Community centers.
What's available from womb to the tomb? What in a perfect world, we've broken the piggy bank. What could we do in Los Angeles city government, in Los Angeles County government, if we had the flexibility, right? What kind of services could people have access to that don't exist today?
Let me paint a visual picture for you. The rest of the city should look like it does in CD 11 on the west side. It should have that much green space. It should have that many parks. It should have those beautiful campuses.
You are legitimately
for education.
blowing my mind right now.
The difference between CD 11 and CD 9 is criminal. It's criminal.
Where's
The
CD
lack-
9?
CD 9 is South LA.
Right.
South Central.
South LA versus West Los Angeles. Both are in the city. You're saying
Same city.
we could have that West LA look and vibe everywhere.
Yeah.
The
And
fact-
I'm not saying we want the vibe of West LA.
vibe in
Let
terms
me be
of
clear, but just we want some green space.
Right.
We want some trees.
That's what I mean by vibe.
We want beautiful
Water fountains that work.
campuses, water fountains that
There's
work.
lights at the park.
Basketball courts that kids can play on.
Right.
I mean, there's so many ways to invest in our neighborhoods. We already know that.
Wow.
We already know that because we have neighborhoods in the city of Los Angeles that are invested in. And you know what they don't have a lot of? Police.
Wow.
When I'm hanging out with my friends in South LA, what I marvel at is how often I'll watch the cops roll up and kids will be just playing in their front yard and they'll literally yell out the window, "Get back in your house," for no reason. That's the reality.
Right. These are
of
our
the
streets.
different, right. That's not happening on the West Side. In fact, who knows what those West Side kids are doing, right? There's more drugs being sold at Beverly Hills High than there is
Right.
anywhere else.
A lack of
but
supervision. Well, put it this way.
Access.
You
Access.
don't find transgressions that you don't investigate, right? You know what I mean? It's like that reverse Michael Jordan quote. If you're making every kid come through a metal detector and tossing lockers routinely and running dogs up and down the hallway.
We keep making excuses for the way things are. We make excuses that it's okay to criminalize poverty because we just don't want to look at the encampments in our neighborhood anymore. Isn't it great that Karen Bass has liberated the asphalt here in our city?
I know, 4118, doing so much work.
3 times the amount of arrests this year as there were last year.
You're saying that basically we could have a citywide experience for everyone who lives here that's fully funded and developed with dignity, and it could be beautiful. And we could have what currently exists in CD 11 in West Los Angeles. That could be what the entire city looks like. But the reason we don't have that is essentially anti-Black forces on the city council and city government in our society that are that's okay for CD 11, but I don't want, I being Royal I, being whoever who's running agency, people drawing lines, right? I don't want the rest of the population to have that. Even though I may not live in CD 11, the fact that some people who I don't think should be having these needs met, I would rather personally go without than see other people have access. And so I'll keep voting the way. And that is why we don't have an equitable distribution of resources. And that is, you're saying even now today in 2023, as we record this, that is the resistance. We'll be right back. Everyone Eats is inspired by Palms Unhoused Mutual Aid, an abolitionist network of care supporting unhoused people in the Palms neighborhood of Los Angeles. Find out more on their Instagram at Palms Unhoused Mutual Aid. That clip is like a fundamental critique of not just city budgeting and like law enforcement, but also the profit angle, right? This idea that even if all we're trying to do is put people inside, if someone can't make a profit, a large portion of our society feels like it shouldn't happen. And that is much deeper and bigger.
It gets into the more fundamental question, which is how do we access our compassion?
Right. And also to do it, you might have to reject 400 years of propaganda that tells you that poor people are poor because they didn't work hard enough, and the rich are rich because they worked harder or smarter than everyone else.
Which, by the way, brings us to our next guest. A lot of that propaganda is felt through debt collectors, through the shame of having debt.
Pushing that responsibility from society that children should be fed and people should see doctors and wear clothes and live inside onto the individual. And so if you personally cannot make enough wages to buy the medicine your kid needs, that's a personal failing of yours. We do have a solution. It's called debt. So we will give you the medicine that your baby needs, but I'm going to need you to pay me a little bit more than the medicine is worth. Dr. Rochelle Brooks from our debt episode really put this together beautifully. So here is that part of Dr. Rochelle Brooks' interview where she's talking about debt and commodification and all the things that make the world go round. I was talking to someone earlier about housing and eviction court, and they were kind of saying something similar, right? That like the point is to not end up in the legal, carceral, punitive
worst case scenario.
Yeah,
right?
what's the threat, right? If the system works as designed,
yeah,
what does it do to the individual?
Yeah, and whenever we think about consequences, if it affects the average person in any type of way, it's going to affect poor people. It's going to affect Black people. It's going to affect working class, queer folks. It's going to affect already marginalized people even more, right? And those are the people that, especially in this space, that we're working to protect. We want to make sure that folks aren't making their situation worse. So yes, absolutely. I think worst case scenario, you default on your student loans. It affects your credit, right? It shows up on your credit report. When you go to finance anything, they look at that and you can't get any type of financing. It can affect if you already have financing, right? There's times where they review your credit regularly just to see your credit worthiness. And if they see that you've defaulted, then it can affect your credit worthiness in that moment. And they can pull back what has already been financed. I've seen it happen where someone had a car, they defaulted on something, and they were able to take away their car, right? They repoed their car because their credit worthiness dropped, or their payments go up because their loan terms change because of the credit worthiness, which if something's getting more expensive, but your pay is staying the same, you're not going to be able to pay it. So you start to fall behind and things just snowball out of control. 2 days ago, I'm going on a walk with my friend. She's in the IT business, and she's like, I can't pay my student loans, but I can't go into default because when I get contracts for my job, the first question they ask me is, am I in default for student loans? And she's a single mom. She's a Latina woman. Your livelihood is based on being able to attain these government contracts. You can't pay your bills. You can't survive without this job. They're asking you if you've defaulted on your student loans. So yeah, it's impactful. We don't want people to go that route. It can destroy their entire lives, their ability to survive. I've never been in default. I've always figured out a way to avoid it. But what I can say is when I do get that student loan payment itself, the anxiety-inducing experience is something that's debilitating. So I think about other people who have compounded responsibilities, health issues, needing medical care, all of that compounds, and it threatens your livelihood. So yeah, that's something that we want to avoid, but also we want to highlight the ways in which it does affect folks, because it shouldn't be this way, right? It shouldn't be, I'm going to school and especially into public service. I'm going to school, I'm going into public service to serve my community. And these could be the effects of that. I could not ever own a home because I could potentially default on a student loan. I could never get a government contract because I could potentially default on a student loan, right? These are all possibilities that should never happen. And that's why we're organizing, to make sure that they don't happen in the future. We want things to get better. We want things to improve. We want education to be free. I don't want my kids having to navigate, do I default on my student loan or do I, pay for hysterectomy, right? Those choices shouldn't have to be made. We should both be able to get medical care and we should both be able to get an education. Everyone eats. Debt Collector does work in other ways as well, not just education. We have household debt in general. Right? It's not just educational student loan debt. We have debt due to inability to pay rent, right? You're facing eviction because you can't pay rent. You have these bills building up. And so we created a tool for that as well. We have the Tenant Power Toolkit, which allows people to address their eviction process and gets them the support that they need throughout the eviction process to fight it, hopefully to stay in their home and organize throughout. We have a great legal team behind all of these tools. So yeah, we're fighting rent debt. And then we're also, there's new terrain with medical debt, folks being able to afford health care.
Right.
And then also carceral debt. About 1 million people in California have bail debt.
Right.
And that's something that we don't want to see. Obviously, it's a special kind of predatory when you're put under imprisonment against your own will and you have to go into debt for it, right? And your family has to go into debt for your imprisonment.
Right. Before trial, let's be clear.
Before.
Right? This is before trial.
Pre-trial debt. Yeah, bail debt is pre-trial. You're not convicted of anything. You're not guilty.
Right.
So it's presumed guilt. That's the best way to put it, presumed guilt. So yeah, bail debt, that's another tool that we've created. And it holds bail companies accountable. They're also performing illegal policies and antagonizing people and harassing people in ways that they shouldn't. So it allows us to overturn some of that debt and give it back to the folks in need.
Back with more Everyone Eats after this. Everyone Eats is inspired by Los Angeles Community Action Network, whose mission is to help people dealing with poverty create and discover opportunities, while serving as a vehicle to ensure we have voice, power, and opinion in the decisions that are directly affecting us. Find out more at cangres.org. That's CANGRESS.org. We could be living in a world where everyone gets everything that they need, but instead, we live in a quote-unquote meritocracy where those who have because they deserve it, and those who don't also deserve it. We buy into the propaganda that conditions us to believe our status, our place is our fault, or the fault of someone else, they'll vilify them, blah, blah, blah. And until we drop the propaganda, until we look up instead of looking to our left and right, we're never going to find the actors benefiting from this scenario. Our last guest is Dr. Melina Abdullah, who was in our first episode, and she says something that every time I think about it, it blows my mind again, was that poverty is on purpose. We talk about the police budget in Los Angeles being $3.8 billion, and she does some napkin math, there's 45,000 people unhoused just in the city, not counting the county, and apartments for all of them would be under $100 million. We're spending $3.8 billion on police for $100 million. And this is not even an efficient strategy. This is just paying retail rent to landlords, right?
It's not using the collective power of our government to negotiate for a better price. This is just throwing your hands up and saying, okay, whatever.
This is the American way, which is you know what? JohnLandlord.com LLC, they deserve a capital infusion. Let's just give them $100 million of taxpayer money. That would instantly solve the homeless issue in the city of Los Angeles, but we don't do that because, as she said, poverty is on purpose.
People laugh at what they call Melina math, but I was trying in my mind, if there's 40,000 unhoused folks in LA, right? 40,000 unhoused folks in LA. Now I'm going to bust out my calculator to make sure I'm not wrong.
Please do.
40,000 unhoused folks in LA, and let's say rent is $2,000, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which it is. That should cost the city $80 million to house every unhoused person. Instead, they're spending $4 billion on police. Like, what choices are we making, right? They're not spending $4 billion on LAPD because that keeps us safe, because it creates a better city. They're spending $4 billion on police because to them, it's more important that they create a city where people are scared into their place than to provide people what they need. You could spend the $80 million to house every person in LA, and that's without a roommate. They get their own apartment, right? So you could do that. You could provide free mental health services, which we don't have. You could provide after-school programs. The Rand Corporation, which is not some bastion of liberalism.
Not at all.
Did a study several years ago talking about youth crime. And what they found is that you can virtually eliminate crimes committed by young people by just having quality after-school programs. Virtually all youth crime is committed between 3 and 7 p.m. What is that? The hours between which they get out of school and their parents get home from work. If you had quality after-school programs, you could eliminate youth crime. And why aren't we doing that? It's because, as one of my friends and comrades says, poverty is on purpose. They're creating poverty on purpose. So a people's budget is about saying we don't have to choose poverty. Everybody should be able to have a glass of champagne now and then. Everybody could have that if we made different choices with our budgets. Our budgets should be moral and ethical documents that are driven by the people.
For some reason, directly taking public money and meeting public needs, that is a third rail in American politics. You can't even bring it up at your job or a dinner party or your house with your friends without being accused of being some sort of like socialist, right? Like, I mean, Bernie Sanders has been preaching a watered down version of this for 50 years. And people still treat him like he's Vladimir Lenin himself. You know what I mean? Like, it's confusing, but you know what? We are not looking to answer these questions. We're looking to ask the questions. We're looking to create a environment, a text, if you will, that imagines what we could have if we did things differently. So in our second season, we're focused on how do we move differently in a world where it seems like all possibilities have been stripped away, right? So one of our guests on the second season, who we've already spoken to, is Madeline Pendleton. She wrote a book called I Survived Capitalism, and All I Got Was This Lousy T-Shirt. And one of the, in our conversation, things that she kind of pulled off in her life that blew my mind was owning a home. She was doing some basic math and realized that renting, she's spending way more money than she would if she owned. And the brochures that all these like mortgage lenders are telling her she can't afford to own a home. She said, maybe they're lying, though. Maybe they benefit from me believing that. Why don't I investigate something else, see what else is possible? Through her own work and community engagement, she realized that you can have more than one person on a mortgage. And so she rejected this idea that a single family must own a single family home on a single family home zoned lot. And she was able to buy a 2 units, 1 lot situation where her part of this mortgage is 1/4 what she would be spending if she bought this property by herself. And through that, she was able to own a home and is able to afford it still because she just rejected this propaganda that we're fed, which is, this is the only way to do this thing. And if you step outside this line, you will be punished. Something she said in the interview a couple times, a couple different ways that I remember is when you actually don't have anything, when you are actually broke and someone tells you this is the only way to do it, you immediately know that's bullshit. And I'm like, okay, cool. Well, just in case there's another way for me to do this that doesn't cost $1 billion, I'm actually going to go ahead and try and figure it out myself. Oh, look, hey, just like everything else in my life, turns out you can do it a different way.
I think that's one of the hardest things I had to reconcile was that I was so resistant to learning anything about money for so long because it all felt like that. Because it's the obvious answer is I need more money and I don't have enough money. Nothing else is going to help that. And it was hard for me to learn that there were small things I could do that would improve being poor, you know?
Yeah.
But they didn't make me not poor.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's just you could be poor in a slightly more comfortable way if you wanted, if you made these small changes. And I was so resistant to even hearing that because it felt like an indictment of my character. And I think that's the conversation that's really missing a lot on the left is there are things you can do to financially help a little bit if you learn certain rules of the game, like an appreciating asset, just learning what that is, you know? And okay, these things can be helpful, but none of them are going to make you not poor. They're just going to make you slightly more comfortable while you're poor.
Thanks for listening to Everyone Eats. The show is hosted by me, Jeremy Bowditch. I'm also a producer on the show. So is Joy Sanford and Dan Gallucci. The show is recorded at Boyle Heights Beat in Boyle Heights, Los Angeles, California.
If you have ideas for guests, if you are someone who has something to say, if you think that we're overlooking or have not yet gotten to a subject that is very important to you and your community and very important to all of us, let us know.
You can find us on social media. We're on Instagram. We're on TikTok. We're on X, if it still exists. We're on YouTube. We also have a website, everyoneeats.la. Send us a voice note, right? You can do that on IG, might be the easiest thing for you, right? Open up your Instagram, follow Everyone Eats LA, go to your DMs, pull us up, and, hit that little voice message and just start yapping. And, this costs us nothing to put you on the air. So if you feel some type of way, if you have a suggestion, a question, a comment, a concern, let us know, right? Sound off in the comments or put your comment in audio form and send it this way. On our Instagram, every single one of these episodes has an episode guide that's going to have a little bio about the guest. It's going to have a little summary of the episode and also some resources. That's going to be the web addresses and social accounts of organizations doing the kind of work we highlighted in the episode. And then also some next steps, right? Some calls to action. So these are going to be things you can actually do yourself today where you are to get involved or make a difference with everyone getting their basic needs met by our local government. So reach out on social media, reach out on our website, Everyone Eats LA on social and everyoneeats.la. You can email Dan, that's Dan with 2 N's, DANN at everyoneeats.la, or me, Jeremy, at everyoneeats.la, and we will get those emails. We will read them. Send us your voice notes. Send us your comments. We're reading it all, and we will bring it into season 2 with us.